Creamer Media's Policy, I'm Sashni Murli. Author Willie Curry joins me to discuss his book, Blue Eland Foxtrot. Welcome, Willie.
Thank you.
Tell us a bit about yourself from growing up to where you are today.
Well, I grew up in Cape Town and studied at the University of Stellenbosch and UCT. And I was a teacher for some years at Livingston High School in the Cape. And then I got involved with the Film and Allied Workers Organization in the 1980s, which was campaigning around broadcasting issues. And in particularly after 1990, when the ANC and other organizations were unbanned, we challenged the SABC and to be a neutral, impartial broadcaster during the negotiations. And after that I became involved in policy matters, broadcasting, telecoms and the internet.
Your book consists of two texts about students in the 1970s and 80s, which you discovered while browsing for second-hand books on the Grand Parade in Cape Town. Can you tell us about this?
Well, the person who finds them is Professor Rambunctious Sithole, who's a history academic, and he comes across them and decides to edit and publish them. So he's the kind of link between the two parts of the novel, and comments on the text and writes his views about what he thinks is revealed in the two texts. The one for the Foxtrot project deals with the 70s and a group of students who challenged the apartheid government of B.J. Vorster, and in the 80s they become involved with the United Democratic Front in challenging the regime of P.W. Botha.
Tell our viewers what Blue Eland Foxtrot is about.
Well, it's an adventure story. It follows the activities of this group of students, and at the same time it tracks the political developments of the 70s and the 80s, and really it's to do with parallels between the 70s and 80s and our current period. And what I found when looking at that was that there were kind of uncanny similarities between the outgoing apartheid nationalist government and today. For example, they both have a focus on a kind of exclusive nationalism, white nationalism in the case of Vorster and BW, and a kind of black nationalism in relation to Zuma. There's abuse of state funds. In the 1970s, Vorster was caught up in secretly developing a newspaper, The Citizen, and subsidizing it. Today we see the emergence of the New Age newspaper, which receives extensive subsidy from the state. There's an obsession with nuclear power, both in the 70s and today. Two massacres take place, one in Soweto in 76 and one in Marikana in the current period. So the two eras seem to kind of mirror each other in ways which bothered me, so I thought I'd explore them a bit more. And of course one of the key similarities is the way in which the SABC as the public broadcaster was abused in the 70s and 80s as an apartheid state broadcaster, and is currently being abused as a Zuma state broadcaster. So, what does one make of these patterns? And that's what the novel explores.
What would you say is the major theme of the book?
Well, it's to do with what kind of leadership and governance do we want in the country, and what can we learn from our history about that. And are we condemned to repeat our history, or can we actually break from it? Because at the moment the pattern seems that we are repeating things rather than making a significant break with our the way in which we have done things in the past.
Tell us about the research needed for this book and the development of the characters.
Well, I did a lot of traversing through history books and biographies, for example, of B.J. Forster and P.W. Botha. I looked at Steve Biko's speeches, Rick Turner's works. I looked at the speeches, the Rubicon speech of P.W. Botha in the 80s, various histories of the war in Angola. So there's fairly extensive research behind it, and I drop in elements of the actual live history into the text at various points.
This book is very fast-paced, which complements the satire. Why was this route taken?
Well, it's to do with the way in which the adventure story developed over time. Back in the mid-18th century, there was a book by Henry Fielding, a British writer, called the History of Tom Jones. And what the key features of that is one, that it is satirical, two, that the chapters are very short and fast-paced, and thirdly, that there's a kind of continual reference to history and debates and the politics of the day, as well as quite an extensive sexual content and a general comedy of usually of errors that takes place.
Did you learn anything from compiling this book?
Did I learn anything? Yes, I learnt that we have an extraordinary history, and that digging into it, we find all kinds of, well, I found all kinds of strange ironies and uncanny kind of occurrences, and that I think it's a way for me of making that history live, even though at the end of the day it's just a story, an adventure.
What do you hope readers will take away from this book?
I hope that it will help people think about the present, think about our history, and become more aware of how that there are alternative pathways that we can take. We're not stuck with that history. We shouldn't be repeating it. There is another way forward here.
What can we expect from you in future?
Well, the editor, Professor Rambanksha Sithole, is writing his own book. It's a kind of political, small political book called Professor Rambanksha Sithole's Guide to Social Democracy in Mzansi, where he's going to look at a whole lot of political questions related to where we are today. I'm also working on a second novel that is set in the period between 1903 and 1912, which will look at that particular historical moment.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome.
That was Willie Curry discussing his book Blue Eland Foxtrots.